Like my favorite thing in the world I taught my kids is when you go to an art gallery, find the fire extinguisher in the corner. And whatever happens, there's always a fire extinguisher. And look around, and then all three of you, it's got to be a group, go up and just start really staring at the fire extinguisher. Maybe get down on the floor and look up. And every time someone else will come up and think, what are they looking at? And once they start looking, you fuck off and you've just started a chain. And you can go away for 6 hours and come back. And there'll be people still looking at the fire extinguisher. That's my favorite thing in
It's
life.
like with George
Brilliant.
Costanza, where he says that he doesn't like art because he has to have someone explain and then someone explain the explanation. But had you?
I'm rewatching Seinfeld now. My greatest
genius.
shame is when I was making Trigger Happy, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, I adored after Trigger, but I remember watching Seinfeld in the '90s and not really getting it. And then I've now watched Seinfeld all the way through 3 times, and I 100% think it's the greatest show ever made. Like,
It
there's no
is.
question. And George Costanza is the single. Now I know he's Larry. I don't know if that makes it better or worse,
But
but
Dom, do you think it's better than The Big Bang Theory, though?
That is the question, actually. Yeah. Or Young
isn't that
Sheldon.
interesting?
Young Sheldon.
Mm,
Are you joking?
Yeah, of course I'm
Because
joking.
yes, we are. Yeah.
good. Well, weirdly, because my daughter's a neuroscientist. She loved The Big Bang Theory is her favorite show of all time.
Really?
Yeah, but I think
Uh,
because she thought nerds can be cool. That's why.
all right. Yeah, it's funny because like something happened in the last 15 years where
You're responsible for it, you fuckers, with Mrs. Brown's Boy. What the
oh
fuck is that about?
well, I mean, I on my YouTube channel recently, I was talking about Mrs. Brown's Boys and the fact that I love the way that Brendan O'Carroll always has to remind people that he's a member of Mensa. You know,
Because that makes it okay.
yeah, it's
So is
like
James Woods, apparently. So.
James Woods. Well, I was going to say regarding, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, O'Carroll apparently lives half the year in Florida, and he's very rich and probably drives a Ferrari.
And
But
he's
at
on
the
the
same
TV.
time, the cost is. I mean, we've spoken about this, David, before, where it seems like when Ricky Gervais came out with extras and did "When the Whistle Blows," you having a laugh.
It's the
That
same thing.
he
Yeah,
just
it's the
went,
same
"That's
thing.
a fucking great idea. I'll do that."
I
And
know,
then,
but
of
I
course,
genuinely, I know people say this shit, and I'm totally aware that there's totally alternative comedy, there's indie comedy, and there's mainstream comedy. And I'm not a snob. Like I will laugh at anything if it makes me laugh. But everyone says this, and it's true. I have never met, literally physically met anyone that likes Mrs. Brown's Boys, and yet this thing is there. Like, I mean, is it like the
It's
world's
like
most
people who buy
elaborate prank?
Westlife albums. I mean, there's
Huh?
obviously millions of them.
But there aren't. I mean, I've never. I mean, I've
Well, the
met
thing
people that
is,
like Jim Davidson. I get that, but I just who are these people?
I think they are people who probably
Go
secretly,
to Chubby Brown concerts or
yeah,
gigs.
But
yeah, or
even Roy Chubby Brown, I kind of I've met people that would get it, and I get that. There's this very odd tradition, actually, in British comedy. I always talked about this of dressing up as women. It's very odd, from Monty Python to Dick Emery to I've never.
David Williams.
Well,
but
David, yeah, let's not
it's
go
from the
there.
Soldier's Drag Act from it's
Let's
an
not go
old
there.
English army.
I've never
Like that.
understood what that was about. Is it repressed? It's very odd, that whole thing. I don't even think I'm qualified to do it. I've never dressed as a woman, weirdly.
What,
And yeah,
what
I was a goth. I was a full new age goth with eyeliner, so I'm not repressed in that way. I just don't understand what that is about.
I think it
From
is.
it ain't half
Yeah,
hop mum and all that. Just anyway.
I think it came from the English. I think the idea was that it was a Soldier's Drag Act. I think it's in
Just let my
Blackadder.
dog out. He's got to savage someone at the door. Hey. Oh, kill! Right, there we go.
But I think it's in Blackadder, actually. It's in Blackadder Goes Forth, the old Soldier's Drag Act. The idea was it was such a heteronormative environment that something had to give. And it was like this sort of suggestion that there needs to be some femininity.
Well,
There needs
I,
to
I,
be some
didn't
way.
that happen in Borstal Boy as well, where they
Yeah,
had
it
to have
did.
like, there was like someone had to dress up as a woman just to bring in a sense of.
I totally get that. And Blackadder kind of did that. You know, the whole thing that women used to slip literally into the British Navy by pretending to be someone called Bob, and stuff like that. I kind of get all that, but it's just so odd now when you look at the hatred of, I'm not certainly not going to get into the whole trans debate because I'm confused on the whole thing, but the hatred that Brexiteers would have for drag queens and stuff like that, and yet our entire mainstream comedy history is something I never understood then, but then everyone watched it. I don't know, it's very odd. Can I just, I'm not, and I'm being such a typical Brit, but it's rare that I speak to properly funny Irish people like this. And so I'm just going to give you my Irish heroes. There's three, and I don't care what you think, but I'm going to tell you. Dave Allen, when I was a kid, I was at school with Dave Allen's kid, and I never understood what Dave Allen did because in the 70s, comedy was like there were only three people making their living from being a comedian. And I remember Dave Allen turned up at our school, sat on a stool, glass of whiskey, and fucking just talked for an hour. And I just remember thinking, how insane. Secondly, I met Pauline. I never really got Father Ted, and I met Pauline McLynn. I did a show with her. Just one of the greatest human beings I've ever met. And also, I think, like all of us, she rescues greyhounds and stuff like that. She's a
Oh, nice.
fantastic,
Sligo woman.
yeah, fantastic human being. And my third is Damien Dempsey, who I met through very confused ways through Sinead O'Connor's ex-husband. But I found myself chanting along to Colony, knowing that that whole song is anti-me. But anyway, those I've just.
Well, I think it's I mean, like Polly McGlynn has done Beckett. She's played Winnie in Happy Days.
Oh,
She's
I
an
know.
incredible
She's
actor.
so confused because she's famous for just more tea, but actually she's this fucking beautiful.
Well, I can imagine how annoying that would be just for, and also from an acting point of view as well, to try and, because like one thing that does my head in about the world of, let's say, acting and drama and casting is the fact that you do something that you're very well known for. Like myself, I was known for doing the Hardy books in Ireland, and like the accent was spot on. The portrayal of that character was, people just people who watched it at face value were like, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
Just some guy from Mayo. What's the big deal? And then the other lad, Chris, who plays the, he's from like Leeds originally. Oh, he's very soft spoken. That's right, yeah. A very funny guy as well. But then he'd be like, yeah, what's the story? Yeah, I was in jail. Like this kind of stuff. And but then, we were never recognized by anyone in the
No, because you were too good at acting, which is what the whole deal is. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Exactly. That was just really frustrating. So I can imagine someone like Pauline Lynn, who is a fantastic performer, would have just, been snubbed and turned down for roles that she would have easily have.
If she went easy, if she just said fuck it and went on I'm a Celeb, she would kill I'm a Celeb. She'd win I'm a Celeb, hands down, national treasure. But she's stuck to her guns, and like I love her for that. Well, it actually, yeah, it was tough, but it really was. That was a proper labor of love for me. That was a sort of emotional book. All my books before have been blagging free trips. Let's go off and have fun and adventure.
That's what I want to be doing.
But that was a proper moment where I think as my dad had died, and I never wanted to go back to Lebanon when my dad was still alive, because we had this odd relationship, and it was always like, oh my God, it's awkward. But once he'd gone, I thought, right, now I can actually have my own adventure in Lebanon. That was one of the most incredible things I ever did. And when I write my books, normally, I love traveling on my own. I think it's important when you write a travel book, you have to go on your own, because otherwise it's lad's holiday.
And you won't really have any time to write anything down because you'd be on the piss the whole time.
But even that I can manage, because I did on Hezbollah, because I took two friends. But yeah, it's not the same. But what I love is normally I'm actually quite a homebody. So actually, if I'm with mates, I'll just sit there. Whereas if you're on your own, I eavesdrop a lot, which is great. But also, you just end up getting in trouble. Not big trouble, but you just get bored and fuck off and meet people. And that's the way travel writing should be, which is why you can't make a TV show and write a travel book. People are like, why didn't you make Dark Tourist as a TV show? I mean, I probably could have done, but it wouldn't have been, like, one or the two wouldn't have been as good, Anyway.
I mean, and also, I suppose if you have a camera crew with you, it takes that sense of, people that you will meet are going to act differently if there's a camera put in front of them.
Of course, but also if you're with the camera crew, like, just by the nature of travel TV, it's one of the great things. You become really good mates with them all, because
you're in the shit together.
Travel cameramen and soundmen are only got that job because they're really nice people, because they would never have got a job again. So they tend to be the nicest, coolest people ever. And you're in a great city, you just end up all getting pissed with them. Why would you hang out with anyone else? Like on a random chance. And it's actually the real, no one wants to hear about your great adventures. They want to hear about when things go to shit and when you're bored and when just stuff, I just get into trouble, and I love that. That's what it's about.
And the camera guys always have really they always have really practical clothing, expensive like Sprayway or North Face jacket.
When my car crashes in the middle of the Rockies or whatever, I'm in, for some reason, in shorts and a t-shirt. These guys will have 5 layers of thermals and hand warmers, and they'll probably
hiking
have
boots
and a satellite phone and probably their own personal jetpack. I mean, just also because like we're artists in the very loosest term of the words, we're impractical fucks. Like we have no idea what we're doing. These people would be able to start a fire, probably build a small log cabin, probably plug in electricity. We'd end up not leaving, Whereas me, I'd just have to panic.
But I always had an idea for a show which would be funny, where basically the show is about a camera. Like if you look at Bear Grylls, for example, it's like, I'm going down this vine, I'm climbing up this rock, oh God, the terror. But then you think like, well, who's filming you?
Oh, listen, this is my favorite story ever. So Michael Palin, it's one of the things Happy Hour was all about. It's about trust in TV. It's supposed to be a big thing. It's supposed to be like, you're supposed to tell the truth in TV. The travel documentary is the last lie in television. So Michael Palin's Around the World in 80 Days, brilliant. But there's moments where he goes, so we realized that we had 4 minutes to make the train in Alexandria, and if we missed that connection, we were fucked. And they finally gets, although he'd never say fuck, they get to Alexandria, he gets on the train as it's going, and then there's a beautiful shot of the train leaving. You go, well, who the fuck took that? Like that. And there was another one where he's in Ethiopia, and he's going, we've been told that if we get out of this car, we could be ripped apart by locals. Westerners have never been seen here. We had to get through as quickly as possible. And you're hearing this on a voiceover with a beautiful shot from miles above, looking like not drone. You're like, well, who the fuck is taking that? But that's fine, you get that. So in Happy Hour, I was trying to take the piss out of all those things. And again, on the wrong channel, because it was Sky. So you can't be supple on Sky. But in Happy Hour, I made things like, you can only ever arrive or leave a town at sunset or sunup. If you get there at 3 o'clock, tough shit. You just have to sit and wait and then drive in, because it's all about beautiful shots and stuff.
Getting the
I
shot,
want the travel to be like, travel's often shit. People are wankers. People smell. Like, people are cunts. It's not all, oh, look at this wonderful poverty and all this shit. It's real. Like, that's what I love about travel.
But like, I mean, what was interesting to me about that is that, like, do you think there's a sense of seeking out what some people will call hardship? Because my idea of a holiday is sitting in a city and having cake fed to me and being wheeled around art galleries. Like,
yes.
I think
if we're going to get Freudian, I think I was always made to feel really inadequate by my dad. My dad, when he was 18, left school, was flown to Canada, where for 6 months he was trained to fly a Spitfire. And then he went to the Pacific, and he fought in the last year of the World War II off HMS Implacable. And he was a Fleet Air Arm pilot. And he flew over Hiroshima the day after the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. Not only that, but growing up, because he was so emotionally crippled, like when we were living in Lebanon and we were getting shells landing around our house, we were all in the basement of the house. My dad would refuse, and he would sleep. It was like some kind of weird colonel refusing to accept the defeat of Khartoum. He'd like sleep in his bed on the corner. It's like, what are you proving by that? So I think I always
that
had
is dead hard.
But he wasn't dead hard. That's what was so weird. If he was dead hard, if he was like Ross Kemp, I'd understand it. But that my dad's defining thing was the fact that he went to Oxford afterwards, and he said there was this massive gap between people that had left school and spent 3 years at war and then at Oxford, and people who, just by chance of birth, had left school and gone straight to Oxford. It was massive. And that whole camaraderie and the adrenaline of war, like, defined him. But it also fucked him up. He said to me, and it's one of his rare moments where he was open, he was in a state of constant terror and panic, but you had to just crack on. And it fucked him up for life. But he judged me on that. I always felt that I needed to be doing something to prove that I did something like that. And on top of that, when I grew up, the people I looked up to in Lebanon were spies, diplomats, foreign correspondents, or travel writers. And I remember thinking I was obsessed with travel writers or foreign correspondents. So when I wrote Dark Tourist and I went to Cambodia, I wasn't even a foreign correspondent not being part of the war, following the war. I was someone following a foreign correspondent who's following the war. I was like 2 degrees of separation. But I think I've always wanted to try and, I think I would have been someone who in the Victorian times would have gone off, and I was probably the unwanted child of the family. And I think I'm going to try and prove myself in battle. But I never knew when the moment came. Like Winston Churchill had that in his great book, the one about his early life when he went to Sudan and stuff, and he was clearly a cunt. But he said there is nothing that defines a man more than how he behaves when he's under fire.
The fact, I mean, because I did a bit of hidden camera before, and I just felt very very awkward and uncomfortable knowing that they, you know. So I started making it about me being the mad one and them
Why were you
reacting to it.
uncomfortable? Because you felt bad for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, for me, and now this is what I hate about analyzing comedy, but I realized why I never felt uncomfortable. Because I grew up watching fucking Hidden Camera where it was like, find a bloke whose life is his car, throw his car in the sea, he'll get angry, ha ha ha, and then you tell him it's a joke before he stabs his wife. To me, trigger happy and the stuff I watched when I was a kid, possibly because I grew up in Lebanon, I speak French, I watched a lot of very slightly surreal stuff from Belgium and France, and their Hidden Camera was pointless. Like there was a guy who, his whole thing, like Euro Disney opened up and weirdest comedic output, and he hid a Smurf costume.
Ayo.
Yeah, the Strumpf. And he went into Euro Disney, and once he was in Euro Disney, he just got dressed as a Smurf, and he looked no different from Mickey or Goofy, but because he wasn't a Disney character, he was immediately arrested. And there's this fantastic shot of a large Smurf being literally thrown out of Euro Disney. Now, I would have made a whole series on that. They did that just for themselves. Like there was a French group who used to kidnap those models of Ronald McDonald outside McDonald's places, steal it, and then set up fake hostage videos in car parks and mime him. And it was all brilliant. This would have been Chris Morris stuff, but they just did it for the sake of it. And my absolute hero is a guy called Neil Godin, who was called Les Intarteurs. And he was a classic Belgian surrealist, but that makes him sound poncy. He was a surrealist anarchist, and he had this theory that the only way of truly defining the good and the bad in a person is how they react when they're custard pied. And so he would decide that someone like a newsreader in Belgium had become too pompous, and so they would target him. And so he and his mates would meet in a bar, and they'd get pissed and and sing Belgian anarchist songs, and then they'd just go and attack this guy at a public meeting and custard pie him. And if the person they targeted behaved badly, and there was a particular French philosopher newsreader who was so pleased with himself, they did him 22 times because he behaved so badly. And they became very famous when they did Bill Gates.
Oh, I was going to ask what they're the ones who did Bill Gates.
And they did Bill Gates. But what I love about this, I mean, these guys went on for like 6 years and they filmed it, but they never did a TV show. They literally did it. And it's what Sam and I were always about. They did it for the beauty. They just did it because they felt it was good. It's like when you watch that film, what's the famous Amelie, and they steal that concept of the people that steal your garden gnome and then send you postcards from around the world from your garden gnome. It was that kind of beautiful pointlessness that makes me laugh. The thing I think is the worst thing in our whole world is what's seen now as a failure in politics is someone who flip-flops, someone who says, oh, I was wrong. And everyone's like, yeah, you're wrong. I go, I want a politician who says, do you know what? I'm fucking wrong. I've changed my mind. That's the person I want in charge.
It's a very good point, because that's something that you don't, nowadays, if you apologize for something, it's like blood in the water.
We got you.
Yeah, and basically, if someone is contrite for wrongdoing and they genuinely mean it,
because there's a lot of fake contrite. That's why, it's like I apologize. It's terrible. My wife is behind me, and we're going to have an inquiry. Fuck that shit. Like the great one, Hugh Grant, not a politician, but actually one of the bravest people ever. I mean, Hugh Grant kicked off the whole the power of the media. He started that whole thing when they wrote that article, and it was about how the way they treated him. And he did the greatest thing when he was caught with Divine Brown, and he's got what's her name, Liz Hurley at home, and he gets caught getting
with a bit of naughty strange.
Divine Brown. What I love is he goes on the chat shows, and rather than having a PR thing of I'm in therapy, I've changed my ways, he goes, I just fucked up. I'm an idiot. And it was like, people don't know what the fuck to do with that. I mean, that was the best performance he ever did in a Richard Curtis movie that didn't exist,
But that's something, Dom, that like I often say, imagine, like, I would rather Liam Gallagher as a prime minister than Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer. 100%. You know what I mean? They're just basically someone who just says, "Oh, fuck it, what are you going to do about it?"
Yeah. But the problem is what everyone says. It's always like when it's not them and they use the Liam Gallagher thing, they don't say Liam Gallagher. They always say David Beckham. I go, David Beckham? He's fucking worse than all of them. There's no man on earth more desperate for kind of approval and House of Lordsism. Fuck that shit. The best thing I ever heard, there's this amazing podcast called This American Life, which has been going on for 20 years. It's people say we do the best radio, Britain, Ireland. It's sort of true, but the best spoken word thing in the world, no offense to your podcast, anyone's podcast, is This American Life. It's random, it's hosted by Ira Glass. And there was a thing on democracy, and essentially there was this thing about an experiment they did in, I think it was Bolivia, in a high school, and they wanted to elect the people running the high school, the student council, and they decided rather than saying who wants to run for the council, they basically said everyone in the school is going to be in a random lottery to be in the student council, unless they explicitly say I don't want to be in it. And of course, what happens is it means the good-looking popular kids, the people with the gift of the gab, that some of them might get in, but it also meant the really quiet people who would just think, oh, I'll never get in and stuff, got in. And it's not the perfect solution, but it is a thing of almost like, that if you just leave it up to a popularity contest, the wrong things are going to be chosen. That's why you end up with Nigel Farage and all these people. You need something. There's no perfect political system anywhere.
I think the reluctant, those who are the most reluctant to do it would probably, because they're not going into it for the reasons career politicians and con men and narcissists. Do you know, it's interesting that your top 10 psychopathic occupations is surgery, civil servants, clergy, police and security,
it's
law.
God complex.
God complex, yeah. CEO.
So clergy specifically.
Yeah, because you're wielding the power of God over somebody.
Yeah. We invented that.
Yeah,
law, media, radio, television. Oh, sorry, television and radio, journalism, chefing, and I always fucking forget the last one.
I've met a few in my job as well.
We know all those. I mean, that is true. I want a party called I haven't got a clue. Literally, it's like, but you don't. I mean, the problem is you want people that are able to make a decision, but they need to be able to make that decision from a good place. And the problem is, so as an example, Donald Trump, when he first came up as a concept, I knew he was a cunt, 100%. But the concept is that his initial thing was, look, I'm already a billionaire. Let's forget whether he is a billionaire or not. And he goes, and most people climbing up are trying to climb the greasy pole, and therefore they'll compromise because they're paid off and whatever. He goes, I've already got all the money, so I'm going to make the right decisions. Now, unfortunately, I think that's the right call, but just the totally wrong person, because he's
the funny thing is about Trump is like what I like about Trump is the fact that he doesn't like I remember hearing something about where this is years ago, like 2006, he's talking about Martha Stewart, and he was he said something like, I'll create my own show and destroy you with ratings. Like,
Yeah.
he's an absolute narcissist, right? I mean, it was like yesterday he had those. It was like, I've got a very big
NFT.
announcement to make,
It's
and it was just an
mental.
NFT of
And
him
they've
as a
sold out.
superhero.
It's crazy. I mean, I get totally. Politics has become so scrutinized, so you have to be perfect. You can't make a mistake. That only the dullest, blandest people survive, and they become so like anodyne and the same that if you're a coal miner in West Virginia, you think, fuck, I just want someone that says it as it is. Now,
Yeah.
this is the Katie Hopkins thing. We can all say it as it is. We just choose not to because we're not cunts. But if you are going to vote for someone that says it as it is, don't vote for Donald Trump because he cares even less about you than the anodyne people. It's not tricky stuff.
But the thick of it did that so well as well.
The media is
Yes.
the media is so powerful as well that anybody that does go in and try and, let's say, take on the military-industrial complex or something like that in the States, anybody who tries to go in, they'll be destroyed by people who are working.
I agree with that, but I think it's more serious than that because I think the problem is that most of us are that terrible word centrist. We're not extremists. We can agree with a bit of the left, bit of the right, and that used to be fine. And the problem is that social media now is what rules us. And the only thing that cuts through on social media is extremes. Extremes on the left, extreme on the right makes us angry. And that gets clicks. So most of us are in the middle. Like we hate Farage, we hate Corbyn, maybe you don't, whatever. It's not we hate, but it's like these aren't people that are going to be able to rule us properly. We want something that works and is decent.
I mean, basically, you want something that can accommodate to the majority first, and then you get your society in a point where most people are happy, and then you try and cater for those on the fringes.
Yes, but
I don't understand why it's so difficult to
rule us one way or the other, and we swerve from one to the other like a drunk in a fucking motorway crash.
But the Tory party are incredible at that. Like they have invested their money so much in the spin machine to the point where I think it was Stuart Lee said that they had the same policies, they just cloaked them in more palatable language. Like in the 70s, you knew where you stood with them because they hadn't finessed the idea of
it's interesting
of
with
the
the Tories
message.
because you always had, Tories, you thought, oh, he's almost decent, but he's a Tory. So you'd have a One Nation Tory like Rory Stewart or, old school Tories. And then you'd have middle Tories. Then you'd have the radical Tories. Like Boris Johnson got rid of, even if you're not a Tory, like the sort of vaguely decent Tories. So all that centre, the sort of normal, decent people, the ones that you and I would all enjoy going to for a drink with, because they wouldn't just say, I'm fucking right. It'd be like, they have my opinions, your opinions, but we can discuss it. They've all been cut out of the thing. And now it's just, I'm right, and there's fucking nothing in the middle. And that's crazy.
There's a great line in the Yeats poem, The Second Coming, the centre cannot hold. And I kind of, like, I know it's probably cliched.
I don't think it is cliched. I mean, look at it now. Why are the Lib Dems, I don't know what the fuck, I don't think I could actually, yes I can, Ed Davey, but it took me a moment to even name the fucking Lib Dem leader. Like, they should be cleaning up and saying, look, there's cunts on both sides. Let's all agree on something. But that doesn't. It's not.
But I don't know what the story is with the Lib Dems, because they've just never been appealable to anybody.
I agree. Because they're trying to be something for everyone, sort of thing. It's very weird.
And they fall between the two stools.
And I know I've become a centrist dad or whatever, but I'm like, it's not about the status quo. I'm the last person to want the status quo. But what I want is the vast amount of the country getting what it is they want. And actually, that is proportional representation, I have to say. When you've had a history of massive internal conflict and occupation, you kind of tend to want stability and stuff. Whereas England is so cocky because for the reason that we've never been invaded for ages and we won the war, we think, oh, we're different. It's like, you're not fucking different. It's really weird. Anyway, this is too much.
But when you were doing such miserable weather, like, I found what was interesting. Thanks very much.
I was gonna do it myself.
I've talked for 30 hours.
An hour and a half in, and suddenly, yes, there was a book chat.
I've done this for 30 hours this week. Okay, so I'm used to working ways into things. But
you're not going to release. Are you releasing this whole thing as one thing? Which I'm very happy if you are. But
whatever. People, yeah, weirdos.
Hello, weirdos.
But what I liked about that was that it reminded me of a few people. It reminded me of Hunter Thompson that came through.
Yeah, I didn't take many drugs, unfortunately. I would have. Trust me, there were a lot of places when I was doing such miserable weather when I was driving around England, where a lot of hallucinogenics would have helped.
But there was the grotesques you encountered, and they were grotesques, and which I think was just like there was a bit of, I don't know, not so much Forster in that one because Forster was more for the other ones. Some Cervantes, I think, a little bit in there. Well, that's probably more Scary Monsters.
When you sent me this email and you were comparing my books, obviously there's a part of me incredibly flattered with all those incredible people, but it's quite odd. So I'd say most of my travel books, Orwell is my hero, like 100% hero on every level, but mainly because he doesn't fuck about. Like Orwell is prose. It's like he's not trying to be poncy. It's just like tell a story, get in there, like make Orwell is like someone writing for Vice now, like ages ago. I thought he was incredible. Forster, I grew up with. It was the first thing I ever studied in English. E.M. Forster, Passage to India, stuff like that, where I could feel like Forster. There's this incredible scene in Passage to India, which is like probably the most influential scene on me as a kid. And it's when in Passage to India, there's the big trial and all the Indians are there and the posh English are there. And everyone is kind of is dwarfed by this untouchable, the lowest caste. And he's sitting there pulling this fan to fan the courtroom. And he has the most perfect body and he's the most perfect human being. And Forster says something along the lines of, he was there just to show how little God cared about humans' categories. That was so important to me. It was incredible. But actually, such miserable weather, the closest person, and again, I'm not comparing myself in any way to this, but people I thought, fuck, they did the same thing, was Defoe. Defoe did this incredible sort of such miserable weather in, I don't know when he did it, 1780 or whatever. And I was like, fuck, it hasn't changed much. Because occasionally I'd be somewhere and I'd look up what he wrote. And I was like, yeah, Hartlepool hasn't changed.
Was there some Swift in there as well?
No, I've never read Swift.
I thought there was a little bit of like the Heart of Darkness thing there as well. The idea of like, this place is terrifying.
Heart of Darkness, if we're talking about Conrad, is part. I mean, obviously, I literally did Conrad. I did Heart of Darkness. I went down the fucking Congo in a canoe, and I've never been more thinking, Jesus, I understand. Although there were
where was like, can you name some of the most Conradian parts of the UK that you've met, that you've visited?
Darkest Bradford or something.
Shopping centres.
That's actually an amazing. That's a perfect question, because actually, if you look at what Conrad was about a place that had its own structure, but was seen by outsiders coming in as being savage, and therefore we need to civilize it. And actually, they go mental themselves, and you end up with two mental communities. So the word Hull comes to mind just straight away. This is my favorite conversation of all time. So Bowie, my favorite song of all time by Bowie is 5 Years.
Yes.
5 years, I went to Live Aid. It was my first proper gig. And he was going to play 5 years. It would have been my perfect moment. I'm 18. Bowie's there at a not enough moment. He's going to play 5 years. And fucking Thomas Dolby plays keyboards for him. And Bowie says, I'm going to drop 5 years because Thomas Dolby wants to play TVC15, which is my least favorite Bowie thing. When I was a kid in Lebanon, I wasn't sure what Bowie album to like. I just heard Stardust and I loved Bowie. I didn't know. And I had two terrible Bowie moments. I remember reading Smash Hits in Lebanon, and Ian McCulloch from Echo and the Bunnymen, there was like a song of my life. And of course, if you're a Bowie fan with his wide record background, you're not going to choose Heroes. It's too fucking obvious. So Ian McCulloch chose Fantastic Voyage off Lodger, which I think is probably Bowie's worst album. But actually, Fantastic Voyage is an insanely Bowie brilliant song, but it's not great. And then when I first got to London, I went to the HMV thinking I'm going to buy some Bowie albums. I didn't realize how many albums he had. And I went, like, fuck, it was all this. And there was a guy just leaping through, and he could see me, and he went, are you new with Bowie? Yeah. I said, what do I buy? And of course, he gave me Low. Now, Low is a fantastic album. It's brilliant, but it's not an entry level Bowie.
No, it's like later Captain Beefheart.
But having said this, I think Scary Monsters is the pivot moment when Bowie went from his multiple changes every 2 years to finding something absolutely extraordinary. And then Let's Dance, he went too popular, let's face it. And then every album after that, you prayed was going to be great, and it wasn't, apart from the very last one. So I would genuinely say I keep coming back to Scary Monsters. I should have called the book just Scary Monsters, not Super Creeps. But Ashes to Ashes, Fashion to Fashion, Fashion, Up the Hill Backwards, and my favorite Bowie song of all time, Teenage Wildlife. So yes, I think it is Bowie's greatest album as well.
What about, would you put Station to Station anywhere up there?
I love Station to Station so much. So there's that weird moment when he's playing, he's kind of gone from Thin White Duke, but he's on so much cocaine, but he's also found funk. So you have Fame and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And Station to Station. I mean, Station to Station, the problem is now I've got a balloon, hot air balloon. All I want to do, my ultimate book, is to go, because I love cricket, is to follow the Ashes series around Australia. And I want to do it by train, so I call it Station to Station. But on the other hand, I wanted to do it by balloon. I could call it Wild is the Wind. So I wanted to call all my stuff after Bowie. But my favorite thing about that, some guy wrote to me and said, "Oh my God, you ripped off the name Scary Monsters and Super Creeps." And I was like,
"So what?"
I thought, oh, no one will notice. It's like, I'm not claiming that I'm Bowie's album. It was like,
it's like calling your book Chesney Hawkes, the one and only.
It really was.
Which is, you used something, did you use It's No Game in Trigger at some point?
No, I used, Bowie was very difficult to use because I'd use it on the original shows where we had a blanket agreement, but when it got to international or DVD, we had to change it. My most famous Bowie for me was I used it on The Snail, which is probably, to me, my most iconic bit. And I used Sweet Thing from Diamond Dogs, which is
Diamond Dogs, that's the one.
But then when it came to putting it on the DVD, because we couldn't clear that abroad, I think I changed it to Muse. And I fucking hate it. No offense. So
they're showing off.
People are like, "Oh, what are you doing stealing Muse?"
Huh?
Someone would be like, "Oh, why'd you call it after Matt Bellamy and Muse?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I actually work with the singer from JJ72. He's,
I love JJ72.
Yeah,
no. I'm
Mark.
obsessed
Yeah,
with them. I've been playing them on my radio show. I love JJ72.
Yeah, Mark.
Oh my God, they're amazing.
He's kind of, he works with me in the music college I teach in, and I said to him,
"Oh my God, I love them. What happened to them?" My favorite.
It's complicated.
My favorite. I mean, Water Boys, all that stuff. I know they're Northern Irish, but my favorite one-off song ever of all time is this. That Emotional Fish. Celebrate. Do you know it?
Yeah, this party's over. I'm going home. That's Jerry Fish.
It's
yeah,
it's the greatest song ever.
Yeah, October Swimmer in when the devil is about to get on the bus was pretty incredible. And you probably saw Gordon Lightfoot a few more records as well. That's an incredible song.
Gordon Lightfoot's a great song because I married a Canadian, weirdly. But at the time, in my gap year, I was courting a girl who I went to SOAS with, and whose dad was Canadian consul in Washington, D.C. And I remember being in the basement at their house in Washington, D.C. And she played me two songs, Joan Armatrading, Love and Affection, and Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind. And I'd never heard of either of them because I was 18 or 19. And I remember thinking that was amazing. And then when I got to make Trigger Happy, I remembered this song, like If You Could Read My Mind. And I really hate it because I really hated putting literal music on what I was doing. And I was like this mad, portrait artist. And I thought, oh, if you could read my mind, you'd realize I'm crazy. But it was such a great song. And I put it on. And the soundtrack is the thing I'm most proud of on Trigger Happy. And the most requested song of all time on Trigger was that song. So I thought in my mind, wow, I've discovered this guy. No one knows who he is. He's gonna and I started getting ideas about my station. I thought we could get a Christmas #1. I can bring him out of retirement. I assumed he lived in some log cabin, and we could bring him out. So it'd all be brilliant. So I got my people, because I had people in those days, to ring his people and say, listen, this show's really taking off in England. this song is brilliant. Dom would love to re-record if you could read my mind with you, and we'll make a video. We'll take it to Christmas #1. And we waited, no answer. And I got a bit cocky in the end. I was like, what the fuck? Like, come on. So finally, I rang his manager and I said, hi, sorry, but I don't think you know what a big deal Trigger Happy is and really want to do this. Did you give it to Gordon? He said, yeah, I gave it to Gordon. And I said, what did he think? He said, honestly? I said, yeah. He goes, Gordon fucking hated the show. It was I go, oh, okay. And so I go, so he's not wanting to do it? He said, no, he's not. And of course, now, I didn't realize what a massive deal Gordon Lightfoot would like. That song is one of the most covered songs in the history of the world.
The pop version is offensively bad, but actually the record, the Edmund Fitzgerald, is based on words that Bobby Sands wrote.
That's right. Yeah, he's a complicated character, Gordon Lightfoot. He really is. But
he's sort of like the aggressive Willie Nelson, I think, of Canada.
Canada, but like, there's no aggressive Canadian, so he's confused.
No. What happened to Gene, by the way? Speak to me, someone is.
Okay, so Gene were interesting. Gene to me were like the Smiths light. They were
the Eaton Smiths, my friend calls them.
Yes, that's very good. I love that. And I didn't really know anything about Gene at all, but I just heard that one song, and it worked so beautifully in the scene I used, and I love that song. But I don't really know anything about Gene. Normally, if I love a song so much, I really get into a band. But I think I tried. And a bit like Muse, I sort of, everything about Muse I should like. Slightly prog rock, hippie, Pink Floyd-y. Like, I should love everything about them, and I use Muse, but I just can't get into them,
It's like,
I was at the Leeds Festival in 2002, and I quite enjoyed the show. Origin of Symmetry was out at the time. And
I think live, they're amazing. I've never seen them live. So
they were fantastic. And I remember actually going to witness a festival in 2001 in Ireland, and we got there. I wanted to see Muse, but we got there late. And I remember we were like queuing up to get our wristbands, and you could hear them playing Newborn, and I was like,
get me in there.
Yeah, but there was the Leeds, I don't know, the Leeds Pet Echo or whatever I said, mentioned something about lots of, I can't remember what it was, but the one takeaway from that was plenty of pseudo-arty wailings.
I mean, we're all pseudo-arty wailings, so let's face it.